Hi everyone, and welcome back to Growing Our Retirement. Today we're going to talk about
potting mix, making your own at a low cost. So you're going to go through a lot of potting mix. Well, first of all, it's turned to fall, so we're starting to get the quarter zips out.
Yep, it's chilly.
Staying warm. It's in the 50s. It's very nice. The leaves are turning. Some are still green, but it really is a fantastic time of year. We're also starting to get into our fall planting season. We're potting a lot of bare root plants, and we'll have some episodes about that coming up. But today is part 4 in our series about how to start a small plant nursery. Our goal has been 500 plants. We're doing it on a low-cost budget, and one of the big budget breakers would be soil.
Yes.
So what are you going to use as a potting mix? And what does that depend on?
Where you live.
Where you live has a lot to do with it. So if you live in the South, or you live in the Pacific Northwest, or you live like we do in the Northeast of the country, different materials are available. And soil is something that you would dig out of the ground. A potting mix, though, is something that you usually create out of ingredients, right? And you want to have different components. And those components are something that holds moisture.
Yes.
Something that drains well. You don't want your plants sitting in a pot of water.
Nope.
Right? And third, a lot of people really want to have an organic component. We do use slow release fertilizer.
Yeah.
That's not totally necessary.
No.
But there's minerals and there's an organic plus to having some organic material in a mix. So first we'll go through not all, but a lot of possibilities. We've brought in materials. We've had to have some of them shipped to us because we didn't have them and can't get them here. But we're going to go through a whole bunch of them with you, and we'll talk about different parts of the country and the benefits and the costs of each one. So stay with us and we'll go through all of them. So let's go through some common ingredients in a good potting soil mix. One of the top components of a good potting mix and a common potting mix is sphagnum peat moss, and it's available very widely. It comes in these really large compressed bags. They're about 3.84 cubic feet, and you're going to see most of your pro mixes are going to include a sphagnum peat moss component. One of the next most common is perlite, and perlite is a volcanic rock. It's very light. It looks like styrofoam balls, but it's a little heavier than that. It's actually excellent for drainage, and it is pretty widely available in larger bags that are somewhat economical. If you lived in the South or you lived in the Pacific Northwest, you would likely use fir bark or pine bark. These are more nugget-like, but you can also buy them more shredded. We just couldn't get them, and we had to order these in. The attributes of pine bark are some water retention, lightens up your soil, helps with drainage, and if you can find it locally at a sawmill or someplace in bulk, by the yard, it can be extremely economical. Another, and we've used this before, is mason sand. This is a coarser sand, and it is very good for adding drainage to things like if you're just using a straight topsoil or a humus. You'll get some drainage effect out of the sand. It's available bulk or in bag, and it can become a reasonably good component or ingredient into your potting soil mix. In some places, people actually do put small either beach gravel, or this is pea gravel or river gravel, into their mix. It's got some soil retention potential possibilities. It does help aerate and add drainage to your mix. We wouldn't use it. It's rather heavy and it would be expensive in our area, so even though it's available in bulk, not a top contender to become an ingredient in our mix, but it is one that it is used. Here's a pre-mix. Now this is what's called pro mix, and it's used in greenhouses where you're not using massive amounts of soils. It comes also in like a 3.8 to 4 cubic yard bag. It comes, you can see basically it's a lot of sphagnum peat moss, perlite, and it's nice and light and fluffy. It drains well. Perlite helps with that. but it's expensive. I mean, the bag of 4 cubic foot bag that I bought was $65, and if you work that out per pot, you're going to be well over $1 a pot for something as big as a 3-gallon. A good 50 cents on a small little trade 1-gallon pot. Okay, moving on, we have humus. Now, humus is available in bags, or it's available in a lot of places in bulk. A lot of municipalities have humus that you can take. It's decomposed vegetative material like grasses, leaves. They let it sit for a long time. They turn it over so it decomposes, it gets wet, it dries out, and it becomes a very nutrient-rich medium that's called humus. We're able to buy this locally by the 10-yard truckload. We actually could go to a couple of the municipalities nearby and pick it up for free. So you wanted to get a pickup truck load, or you wanted to get a small trailer load, you could do that sometimes for as little as free. And humus is kind of it's a good part of our current mix that we use. Got a lot of organic material, and we just love it. It's great, but it's a little bit too compacting. It needs drainage, and it should not be used just by itself, and you do want to make sure that it's very decomposed when you use it. In the Northeast, we've got hardwood mulch. So this comes from a sawmill, and this has been sitting for a while. We like to let it decompose a bit before we use it, but this is just bark taken from trees that are going to go through a sawmill, and it's fairly coarse when you get it, but it decomposes over a short amount of time, about 6 months. And it's bark. Of course, it contains very little wood, so bark is fine for your mix, but wood is not. Wood chips would not work. Wood chips would rob your, if you mixed it in with your soil mix, it would rob your soil of potassium as it decomposes. So you could let wood chips sit for 5 years and decompose and maybe use them as sort of a humus, but back to the bark mulch. The bark mulch helps aerate. It helps add drainage. It's light, which is nice. And the nutrients in the bark will decompose over time and will add to the nutrients in your potting mix, not take away. Here's another cocoa coir, which is very popular. We're going to show you a little bit more about this in a second, but it's basically the husks of coconut. It's compressed into a block, and it's shipped mostly from places like India, where they or places where they process a lot of coconut. It's a waste material, but it's very similar to sphagnum peat moss. It's a good replacement if you don't want to use sphagnum peat moss for some reason or can't get it. It's also kind of compact. It comes in these blocks, and this is going to make almost a wheelbarrow full of cocoa coir when it's done. So for some people, it may be a good alternative or a good ingredient to your soil. We've never used cocoa coir. Our daughter uses it and loves using it as a soil amendment. So we thought we would just try it. We bought a block, and
It's kind of fun.
it comes compressed and dry. So we're going to rehydrate some and see what it looks like.
Yeah.
And you know, I mentioned it's not economical, and on our website I go through some of the economics of all of these things. But you know, we're curious to see what it does. We've never actually used it, so we're going to rehydrate some.
Yeah, it's like the outside of a coconut, right?
Yeah, the inner, like there's the skin,
Yeah.
and then there's a coconut inside. It's all that
Cool.
material in between. So let's add some water.
Ooh, it's like a sponge. It's just absorbing it.
Yeah, it's a great replacement for sphagnum peat moss. It's probably going to take 15-20 times its weight in water.
Ooh, this is cool. But expensive.
Well, it's not, you know, depends on your size of your project, but for what we're doing,
The more I
it
think.
really wouldn't work because it would be too
No.
expensive.
Yeah. We're planting hundreds and hundreds of plants at a time.
Yeah, so we work with yards of materials, and you're gonna work with yards of bulk materials or bags.
That's
Although
it.
this whole block could probably make a wheelbarrow full.
This is good. See?
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
So, great. And you probably wouldn't use that all by itself. You would mix in something to add some drainage, like a perlite.
Cool. All right. Well, now we know.
But that's a nice material. Very good. We thought we'd go through a couple of mixes that we know are great. They're for our location, but we'll talk about a couple other locations as well. And just give you some formulas. And we're doing this in proportions. So it's going to be a little, how many of this, how many of that.
Right.
It could be, though, 2 yards, 2 bags, 2 scoops.
Right.
So it's ratios. So we're going to start out with the mix that we like the best for most of our plants. And that is 2 scoops of humus, 2 scoops of somewhat decomposed hardwood bark mulch, and 1 scoop of perlite.
Got it.
And we go a little easier on the perlite than we used to because the bark mulch has a good drainage quality. It lightens up your soil. It's an organic, so it's got some nutrients in it, and that's great. The humus is fine, but it can pack, and you end up with kind of a soupy, muddy mess if you don't mix it with something else.
Right.
So that's why we use 3 parts. A lot of good soil mixes are 3 parts. Right. So here we go. We'll do 2 of the bark mulch. For those of you who remember Cold Stone Creamery, this is how they used to make ice cream, right on the table right in front of you.
It's not ice cream though.
But it's not ice cream. Well, this could be chocolate ice cream. All right, and then 1 perlite. And again, this could be bags in a wheelbarrow. It could be scoops with a bucket loader. It could be in very small quantities, kind of like this.
That's it. Just a rough,
Yep.
some rough mix, and you're ready to go.
Yep, and this doesn't really compact. It stays nice and loose. It's going to drain really well. The costly part of it is the perlite. But I've got on the website, I've got some cost breakdowns on these. And if you can start to pick up or have delivered things in at least 2 or 4 yard quantities,
It helps with the price.
it helps a lot. So now you get down to our target 50 cents per 3 gallon pot.
Right.
25 cents a 1 gallon pot.
Cool.
That's a really good economical number, and it's not going to cut into your backyard nursery profits, which we don't want to do.
So that's one type.
That's mix number 1.
Our favorite mix.
Our favorite current mix that we use all the time now. All right, another great mix is if you don't have access to ground bark mulch or fir pine mulch, you can use a mix of 2 parts peat moss. And peat moss is interesting because that whole bale was about $40.
Yeah.
Let's call this, it's humus, but let's call it topsoil, would be fine, or humus if you can get it. The sphagnum peat moss for a big bale can be about $40, which is a lot better than a pro mix. And that then assumes that you can get the other components at a pretty reasonable price. Perlite is perlite, it's not that inexpensive. We're paying about $40-something per 4 cubic yard bag. But we don't use that as a main component. It's only 20%.
Yeah, this is fluffier.
So this mix, yes, it's really nice and fluffy. You've got the organic either topsoil or humus in it. The sphagnum peat moss, which is nice. It holds water very well.
Cool.
And the perlite allows it to drain well. So you'll be fine with drainage. And that's a reasonably economical mix. And if you're going to be sort of stuck buying a lot of things by the bag, using peat moss as one of the bigger components is going to save you money over time because you get an awful lot out of one of these compressed 4 cubic yard bags. You probably get
huge.
You probably get 8 cubic yards out of a 4. It's almost compressed double.
Right.
So that's another great mix that we would recommend and that we have used. Mix number 3 is for people who have access to bark at a reasonable price. So if you live in an area where you have a sawmill, of which we do, although we don't do this, but we could go pick up hardwood bark mulch or hardwood bark that's been shredded off of trees before it goes through the sawmill, pick it up in bulk and bring it home. And we could go there, probably get 2 yards and pay, I don't know, $10 a yard for it. Very economical. We have it delivered and it costs us about $20 to $25 per yard, which is very reasonable for a potting mix.
Right.
The only thing is it comes and it's a little bit too chunky.
It is chunky.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's meant really to, it's like a decorative ground where you would
Right.
put it around your plants. It's very nice.
Yeah.
But if you leave it sit for about 6 months, it breaks down really nicely and it gets to about this consistency.
Yeah.
So you have to buy it a bit in advance, and everything in the nursery business is always a waiting
It's true.
game. So buy it in advance, let it break down a little bit. And this also goes for fir barks and pine barks.
Okay.
If you can get them in a finely ground, you can use them pretty much straight. Although we like to mix some perlite with it. So
Right.
this is slightly decomposed bark mulch or ground bark from hardwood trees, which is what we have here in the Northeast. And the ratio here that we would use would be like 4 scoops or 4 buckets or 4 bags or 4
Right.
anything. And then we just mix in 1 part perlite, and that just helps with the drainage a little bit. We also think perlite, it's always in the pro mixes and it looks great. It looks very professional, so we don't hesitate to use some of it
Right.
because it adds to the drainage so nicely and it's used so widely because it's a great draining material. So, you know, this is nice and fine,
Yeah, this is nice.
really nice and light.
Yeah.
And it's gonna load into pots really well. It's gonna work in around roots really well,
Yeah, it's good.
and that's an excellent mix. So if you have availability of bark and you're looking for something that's economical, get the bark, even if you have to let it sit for a while.
Yep.
Fir, hardwood, pine, all good, and a little perlite, and you're good to go. Let's talk about some things you never want to use as a potting
Okay.
soil, right? There's some big no-nos. This is America, and America's filled with marketing, and you know there's all these companies putting out these pre-mixed soils and mixes that have fertilizer in them. So
Okay.
I think we're trying to talk you out of buying anything that's pre-mixed, but you don't want to ever buy anything that's pre-mixed with a fertilizer in it. It'll burn your plants. We use slow release fertilizers only in the nursery, small or large, and that fertilizer is going to burn your plants. Your tender little plants that you've just rooted, it's going to kill them. That's a big no-no. So stay away from the hyper marketing stuff and the fertilizers and the
Right.
premixes. You've got to do this economically to make money at it, and you do not want anything that has a fertilizer in it. The other thing is wood chips.
Okay.
So we get truckload of wood chips, and we use it all
You
over
do.
the place to keep weeds down. But it has wood in it, and as the wood breaks down and decomposes, it really does kind of become an organic soil, which is fine if you wanted to leave it for 5 years and let it turn into soil.
Right.
And we have some of that. But it's not good for a potting mix. The wood is going to decompose, it's going to rob potassium and nutrients from your
Interesting,
soil
yeah.
if it's in the mix.
Mhm.
If it's on the top of the plant, that's fine. But if it's in the mix, and lots of people have covered this, but just to make sure that we cover everything, don't put it in the mix.
Okay.
The wood's going to decompose. Even barks that have too much wood in them maybe could be bad. That's why we like to say let them sit for 6 months
Right.
before you use them.
Okay.
So those are a couple of big no-nos.
All right.
And economy is another thing. I mean, you've got to try to borrow a pickup truck, get a little trailer, have things delivered to your house. Try to get things in bulk materials.
Yeah.
We're very fortunate in northern New Jersey. We've got bulk material yards all over the place.
It's true, we do.
We get inundated with advertisements for people that sell all kinds of components.
Right.
So we have no trouble with that. And we found, and it's on our website, you could buy perlite in these giant 4 cubic feet bags, and they're pretty economical.
Yeah.
It's not bad. I mean, unless we start to buy pallets and pallets of them, it's
Right.
really pretty reasonable.
Good.
And we don't use a lot of it. So there's a couple of don'ts. We've talked about a lot of different options for ingredients into your potting soil. So a lot of them are geographically specific. I mean, you just can't get certain things in certain parts of the country.
Right.
They're not available. Maybe where you live, you can't get to certain, bulk supply yards
Yeah.
the way we can. But this is to give you an idea of the kinds of things. We didn't mention, you could use some topsoil
Yeah.
that you buy in bulk. That's available in a lot of places. And then you would want to mix perlite, maybe in sphagnum peat moss, with just plain organic topsoil.
That would work.
Would be fine.
Yeah.
And as your nursery grows, the idea is to kind of grow away from a person that buys in bags to a person that buys in bulk.
Yes.
You know, it's probably 6 to 10 times less expensive to work in bulk
Yeah.
than it is in bags. And maybe we've mentioned a couple components here that you haven't thought of. And some, you know, we still buy perlite in bags. We probably always will. But we're never going to buy humus in bags again. We're going to buy it in 10-yard truckloads.
Right.
But if, as you're starting and you're working on your first 500 plants, you know, you could buy bagged humus. It's not that bad. You could add sphagnum peat moss, perlite, and you could be making a soil mix for, you know, in a 1 gallon pot, maybe for 50 cents a pot. That's not going to hurt your business. You'll be able to do fine.
Right.
As you go along, you can do it. Maybe you live someplace where you can go pick up, you know, a couple garbage can loads full at a time of some bark mulch from a sawmill. That's better than buying by bag. So use your imaginations. Think of the different things that we talked about today, and go on our website, because we'll talk about some of the exact costs of how much it costs if you spend $30 per yard and you're filling 3-gallon pots. I've done some of the math on those and what it costs per
Right.
pot.
Yes.
So I'll put the link in the description or down below, and you can take a look at some of the costs and how they go. And you can equate it back and forth to bags if you're doing things by bag.
And let us know what potting mix you're using.
Yeah, we'd love to hear
We're
it.
always interested to see what you guys are doing, and if you have any tips and tricks.
Yep, and we know what we do in this part of the country. We know a lot less as it gets further from
Right.
here. So we'd love to get some of that fir bark, though, from the Pacific Northwest or down south. It just looks like a great material and
It
very
does.
light.
Yeah.
So lighter is nicer when you're potting all day.
Yes. Oh boy. Yes.
You know, to take some of the aches and
Scooping.
pains out. So thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time, everyone.
Thank you.